G'day and welcome to Adaptive Aviator. In this video we're going to explore the tragic accident of American Airlines flight 5342, which just a few days ago collided with the US Army Blackhawk in Washington DC, claiming the lives of 67 people. We're going to delve into the use of night vision goggles for traffic avoidance, which the crew were most likely using, and also look at other key factors that may well have contributed to this sad accident. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Matthew Dank. I'm a former Australian Air Force pilot and Australian Navy pilot, having flown H60 Seahawk helicopters and also C-17 heavy jets, and also instructed the C-17 simulator for a defense company. I returned to flying about 12 months ago on the Boeing 737 MAX. And this video is really looking at something that I have quite a lot of experience in, and that's operating NVGs for traffic avoidance, deck landings, and low-level flight operations in H60 helicopters, very similar to this US Army Blackhawk. Before we start, I'd like to express my condolences to the families and loved ones of all those who lost their life in this tragic accident, and also to the US military aviation community who will be feeling this very deeply indeed. The reason I'm doing this video really is to raise awareness in the general public about some of the technical and detailed factors that may have contributed to this, and also provide some points for discussion and examination by flight crews around the world who will already be looking at this and trying to learn lessons, not just wait for the crash report to come out in the future days. Okay, before we look at the night vision goggle used for traffic avoidance in helicopters, we're going to take a bit of a look at what seems to be the major contributing factors of this accident. Things like the separation between the aircraft at the time of the accident, things like the arrival procedure flown by the American Airlines flight CRJ 700 and the helicopter route flown by the H60. We'll also briefly look at the ATC phraseology, or words and direction used on the radio frequency, and the TCAS use for this flight and this incident, whether it would have been useful or not. My goal is to grow this channel and bring you as high value content as I possibly can, and you can support me by hitting that subscribe button in the corner and by watching this video for as long as you can. One thing I'd like to do with the examination later in this video of the NVG use for traffic avoidance is just to highlight how something seemingly narrow and minor in the scheme of things can have a fairly large impact on the ability of pilots to deconflict with other aircraft. So there's a lot of detail there, a lot of things to delve into and to understand. It's certainly a lot for pilots to be across, and that's just one of the myriad of different factors that would have been at play in this accident. So there really is a lot of detail, there really is a lot to consider. Okay, what do we know? We know that the American Airlines aircraft, the CRJ 700, was en route to Ronald Reagan National Airport, Washington, when it was planning to arrival runway 1 here to the bottom of the screen. That arrival was changed by ATC reportedly to runway 33 out here to the right, requiring a visual maneuver to line up on the runways. So that is quite a significant maneuver. This is very hard. This is something that would consume a lot of crew attention and focus, particularly at night. I've flown similar approaches into Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam in Hawaii, and these tax and require the utmost effort and attention from crews. The magenta line here I've just drawn to indicate a potential ground track the aircraft would have used to get onto final for runway 33. The X there indicates roughly the impact site, and the yellow the vector roughly of the H60 helicopter coming in from the north. There has been a number of videos shown on social media with ATC radar screens depicting both aircraft closing, and here we can see PAT 25, Army H60 Blackhawk, and 5342, the CRJ, closing on each other, and those two levels, they're 300 for the Blackhawk and 500 for the CRJ, merge towards the collision at the end. It's worth noting the significant reports about just the density of airspace and traffic management concerns around DC, the capital in the US, due to a number of things, a number of bases co-located quite closely, a number of civilian airfields co-located quite closely, as well as significant airspace restrictions, some of which stemming from 9/11 terror attacks and prohibited and restricted areas that have been in force since then. We can see here DCA, or Ronald Reagan International, as well as Route 1 and then Route 4, so helicopter low-level routes that the Blackhawk was traveling on southbound, with an upper level there of 200 feet. We can also see here an indicative orange arrow showing the flight path of the CRJ on final to runway 33. I just want to delve into this a little bit to illustrate what I think is very minimal clearances on this route between the helicopter tracking and between the CRJ route and final tracking to land on runway 33. What I've done here using Google Earth is just to draw out a 0.5 mile final and a 1 mile final that the CRJ most likely would have been tracking via, and profile altitudes for that approach. Now that's based on an elevation of 15 feet at the threshold plus a 50-foot crossing height, and then a 3-degree glide path approach on final, meaning at 0.5 miles you're looking at about 215 feet, and then at 1 mile 345 feet. Now given that the helicopter route tracked the coast of the Potomac here at 200 feet, that is very little separation indeed between any helicopter route and any final route being flown by CRJ. Now that's something you rarely see in Australia. Sydney Airport is a good example of an airport we commonly track past at low level, northbound, southbound in Navy helicopters, where there is significantly more clearance between any aircraft on final to land and any helo traffic. So a big question in my mind, and something I know the investigators will be looking at, is whether that helo route should have been active at all with aircraft landing runway 33, given that if it was active, there was a large onus, I would say, on the pilots and air traffic to manage what is quite a hazardous situation. Now there's been some discussion about whether the crew expected the CRJ landing on runway 33 or landing on runway 1. If they were landing on runway 1, it's fair to assume the helicopter would have thought there was a greater separation than was actually the case. This ATC recording summary is quite insightful because it shows the transcript as I've perceived it from Tower and Pat 25, the UH60 Blackhawk. Worth noting here is that reports are aircraft were on separate frequencies, so their situational awareness was not what it could have been. A big part of situational awareness, particularly around busy airports, is listening on frequency to where other traffic is so we can perceive where they are and anticipate where they're going. So that aids the visual scan, that aids the mental model and the situational awareness on whether other aircraft are a risk or whether they're in fact well clear. So the transcript here noting that the CRJ and Pat 25 were on different frequencies from the tower. Pat 25, do you have the CRJ in sight? Then the tower states, Pat 25 passed behind the CRJ. Then Pat 25 responds, Pat 25 has the aircraft in sight, request visual separation. Notably here, I've stated in blue, readback for the second tower transmission because there was no specific readback. A tower direction like that to pass behind the aircraft is normally something that would need to be read back specifically, pass behind the CRJ, those words, by the Pat 25 aircraft receiving that direction. That hasn't occurred, and it appears air traffic has not followed up on that to ensure that occurred. This morning Australian time, I contacted a colleague and air traffic controller in a domestic tower in one of Australia's capital cities to talk to him about other terminology that might have been used in this case. And he's highlighted to me that clear direction from ATC might have included commentary along the lines of, so direction from tower, Pat 25, traffic is CRJ, your left 11 o'clock, 2 miles, on final runway 33, report sighting. Something more specific and directional to allow that crew to be aware where to look for that aircraft and to help them discriminate between the actual aircraft being passed and other aircraft. And we'll see this is important given how difficult it can be on NVGs to identify traffic in a cluttered environment with built up areas around and a lot of lighting. So in terms of contributing factors, it looks like the arrival path of the CRJ 700 and the tracking of the H60 were not compatible at this point in time. There was very little clearance, it would appear, on those flight paths. Second piece there is ATC direction, or direction to pilots to see and avoid traffic. It's worth noting here that the CRJ American Airlines flight was operating IFR, meaning they had full protection provided by ATC, but the H60 Blackhawk was operating under NVG or night VFR visual rules, meaning the onus was on them to visually separate themselves from the arriving IFR traffic, and that's effectively what Tower was trying to pass on. There's been some discussion also about the validity or the utility that TCAS, or airborne collision avoidance systems, would have offered in this particular incident. So TCAS was fitted to the CRJ aircraft and was possibly fitted to the Army Blackhawk, but it's worth noting here that at low levels, such as on final approach to land, below 1,000 feet, resolution advisories are inhibited, so you're not going to get a TCAS direction to avoid any traffic. And the second piece here is that oral enunciations are inhibited below 500 feet, meaning that even traffic advisories, which TCAS systems will normally provide, won't occur orally at that level. The assumption is the aircraft is on final, it's about to land, and it's in a safe situation with ideally no traffic that's going to conflict, and any advisories may distract the pilots. So there are no resolution advisories, there are no traffic alerts. Something else that I'll mention that all pilots should be well and truly aware of is that if an aircraft is on a collision course with oneself, it's going to be on a constant bearing. This diagram illustrates a couple of aircraft here, not necessarily the same geometry or the same directions that the aircraft were tracking in this particular accident, but if they're maintaining a constant heading and or ground track, they will be maintaining a constant relative bearing. So what this really means is, unlike many other situations where traffic is going to be crossing and actually moving in one's field of view or in one's windscreen, using this 737 MAX as an example, an aircraft on a constant bearing, which is going to collide with the aircraft that we're in or you're in, is going to maintain a steady position in the windscreen. So it's not going to move left or right. It's going to go from a small position in your windscreen and then get bigger and bigger as it comes towards your own aircraft in the last few seconds. This really imposes a big responsibility on crews to actively maintain a lookout and to actually move their head around the cockpit to generate some movement. I'll touch on that in more detail in just a second. Okay, let's take a look at the night vision goggles that I understand the Blackhawk PAT 25 H60 crew were carrying and most probably using on their low-level helicopter route. Okay, so top left of the screen here we can see a helmet set up with what I believe are ANVIS 9s. So this is Gen 3 NVGs developed from the 90s through the 2000s, and so this would typically be a helicopter helmet in use previously by the Australian Defence Force. I know some US crews use this type of helmet on helicopters, and it's certainly the type of helmet in use by Australian Air Force heavy jet crews. These pictures and the picture here to the right of a helicopter pilot on approach to a runway really give a good indication of just how close these goggles sit to a pilot's eye and how little room there is behind that goggle set. So NVGs work by enhancing and amplifying ambient lighting. They do not actively transmit any energy or any lighting, but they use the passive lighting in the environment normally generated by things like starlight and moonlight. And the best conditions in my experience, and certainly during my Helo days for NVG operations, was something like 1/2 moon or below, and potentially even just clear sky with starlight only. This image bottom left shows a scene flying over what looks like hilly terrain here with a few valleys and re-entrants and some trees. And you can just see here how there's reasonably good clarity in that picture of the terrain with no local cultural lighting. So if we see these bright spots around the image, and here to the right of this image here, that's what we call blooming occurring due to lighting or light sources. On the right here we can see even more light sources, and this is a sort of city scene which can occur where you're getting less and less detail of that picture because these light sources are blooming. And this is the sort of thing you might have seen in movies where someone turns the lights on and it gets very hard to see indeed. We can see here in this middle scene just the crispness and the clarity. This is almost the perfect evening for NVG goggle use, and again we can see how that would degrade the resolution and basically the acuity or the ability to derive features very close in to that point light source. Key point here being open scenery like this, somewhere in a rural environment or a coastal environment away from city lights, goggles perform much, much better than they do in a built-up city environment where you've got ground clutter and lighting, which can really make it very difficult to see an aircraft which is lit passing in front of a scene like this with background lighting. Other points to note with NVGs is they really suffer from very limited depth perception. You're looking through effectively two parallel tubes, and you don't have the ability as you would in ordinary vision to perceive the depth of an object as well as you would using the naked eye. The picture presented by the NVGs is monochromatic, so previous generations and many current generations use green monochromatic image, and some of the more recent ones use a white phosphorus, so a white image with different grades of darkness. All right, what I'd like to do here is just take a bit of a look at how the NVGs are set up from a top-down view in terms of the field of view and the performance that they can offer to a pilot. This image here, which I've drawn up craftily, is a top-down view of a person's head with their nose and two tubes mounted and then connected into a set. So as we can see here, the field of view is about 40 degrees from traditional night vision goggles, so not very broad at all. Really corresponds with the picture you're seeing here. So just a very small viewing angle compared to the natural eyes, which I believe are about 220 degrees. So anyone out there, ophthalmologists or optometrists, please pick me up, but I believe it's about 220 degrees. And you can see, just testing yourself, as doctors will do during eye exams, moving your hands forward, you can just see the edge of your visual field there, which is certainly much, much greater than 40 degrees. So what does it mean having a 40-degree field of view? Well, what it means is you can't really get a good picture of all things around you or pick up traffic unless you're moving your head multiple times and taking almost snapshots of the view. So you can see here there's 3 different 40-degree arcs, so that's going to be 120 degrees. And doing that to take multiple snapshots is what's called building a field of regard. Okay, that imposes a fair bit of workload on crews who aren't current or recent or very comfortable with goggles. It is something extra to be skilled at. It does take work and practice. And importantly, for constant traffic on a constant bearing, as we saw before, that's not enough. One also has to move one's head around the cockpit to generate movement, to try to get some movement on that traffic and that point light source. Okay, bottom left here we have a diagram side on of an NVG with the lens here and the ring nearest to the eye, about 3 centimeters only from one's eye, so quite close in. So normally we would set that up by getting the goggle tube and resting it on the finger roughly, which is about 2.5 to 3 centimeters. And what that can indicate here in the diagram is just how little room there is around the side of the goggles for what's called an around goggle scan. And what we have here is the unimpeded field of view for the around goggle scan, noting this is my term, it's not a technical or official term, but it shows that 40 degrees through the lens itself, a dead zone here blocked by the goggle, not giving you anything whatsoever, and then you've got an around goggle scan. Of note, with the goggle image being monochromatic and no color being perceivable through the goggles themselves, we really need to look around the goggles to try to perceive colors, things like navigation lights and other features that might be of use. So really in high traffic situations and high density airport situations, you're having to use a through goggle scan and an around goggle scan together. This takes a lot of practice, a lot of application. Okay, here we can see a diagram of the 2 different sets of vision that are coming in. You've got the aided vision, which are monochromatic, normally a green type screen coming through with 40 degrees field of view, and the around goggle scan. So this is obviously to the side, but also above and below the goggles, and that's going to be unaided vision, so color. So you're not going to get the enhanced brightness and detail, but you are going to get color, particularly on aircraft that are flying around with lights on, displaying things like navigation lights, position lights. They will display that information, and that's very usable to a pilot. All right, I've got a diagram here of some of the more modern NVG systems being developed, which combines multiple tubes to provide a greater field of view. So here you can see a standard single tube providing about 40 degrees field of view, and here you can see 3 tubes overlapping with about 97 degree field of view combined. So these are certainly being developed for ground use, special forces, and for aviation use. I'm not sure if this was the type of goggle that was employed by the Blackhawk crew or not, and it doesn't solve the issue of the around goggle scan and perceiving color. Now you can actually get a sense of how uncanny and strange it is to do this around goggle scan by just positioning your hands in front of your face and your eyes. So using a finger, or 2 I should say, just below your eye, putting your other hand about here, and setting up your hands like so, you can see that looking through those tubes, which represent the goggle tubes, seems to be fairly natural, but then looking around is just extremely obstructed, and it would be very uncanny and unnatural to have to get around, taking information using your peripheral vision only around those tubes. And that's really a skill that pilots develop over time with practice using NVGs, and it's something that's highly perishable. So there's a lot of particular viewing, a lot of particular scanning techniques required of these NVGs. If we're not flying often and we're not comfortable and current in our aircraft type, then these skills degrade and we can be less and less safe. We've looked at the use of night vision goggles for traffic separation in built-up environments with a lot of cultural lighting, a lot of city background lighting, how that makes it very difficult to spot other aircraft. Using these goggles effectively in those environments requires a lot of training, it requires a lot of currency and recency, meaning lots of flying hours, and a high skill level to be able to use that through goggle and around goggle scan effectively. Lastly, I am not an accident investigator. This is not an accident investigation. These are my thoughts based on what I've seen to date and my experience in my Air Force and Navy career. I think this is worth having discussions within flying units and operations, and if you are a pilot, certainly consult your publications and your instructional staff in the first instance. Okay, it brings me a lot of pleasure to think that you may be enjoying this video, so if you have, please subscribe, share it with someone who might benefit from seeing it, and leave your comments below. I can only improve by getting comments from you, my valued listeners, and I try to tweak things every video to pick up my game and improve how I do things. So thank you for your time. I do appreciate it. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again in another video.